My daughter's bed was empty. The furs were cold, and the little carved wolf she held against her chest every night, the one her mother had whittled from river birch the winter before she died, was gone too. That meant Leela had risen on her own. That meant she had walked, and Leela did not walk anywhere she was not carried. I was running before the nurse finished her sentence. She was here, my lord, I swear it. I only stepped into the corridor to fetch the morning milk, and when I came back the bed was. I did not hear the rest. I was already down the stairs, shouting for the guards, and every wolf in Dunhallow heard the edge in my voice because I was not a king who shouted. Not anymore. 3 years of silence had settled into my bones the same way it had settled into my daughter's throat, and if I raised my voice now, it meant something had cracked. Find her, I told Brennan, my captain. Every room, every passage, every gate. If she's left the keep walls, I want trackers on the moor within 2 minutes. He went pale and nodded. Brennan had carried Leela on his shoulders when she was 2, had made shadow wolves on the nursery wall with his hands to make her laugh. That was before the laughing stopped, before everything stopped. I searched the east wing myself. The library, where she sometimes sat under the reading table with the carved wolf pressed to her ear as though it were whispering to her. Empty. The great hall, where she occasionally crept at dawn to watch the fire before the servants came. Empty. The kitchens, where old Marta left a bowl of honeyed oats on the low shelf every morning in case Leela wandered through. The bowl was untouched. My wolf, who had not moved inside me since the night Sira died, who lay like a stone at the bottom of a river I could not reach, did not stir. He had nothing to give me. He had not had anything to give me for 3 years. I found her in the herb garden. It was the last place I would have looked because Leela never went there. The herb garden had been Sira's. She had built the raised beds with her own hands the spring after Leela was born, hauling river stones from the Kell burn while I told her a queen should not be hauling anything, and she told me a queen could haul whatever she liked. After Sira died, I had the garden locked. Not out of cruelty, out of cowardice. I could not bear the smell of the rosemary she had planted along the south wall. It smelled like her hands. Someone had unlocked it. The iron gate stood open, and inside, kneeling in the dirt between the rosemary and the thyme, was a girl I did not recognize. She was young, early 20s, brown hair tied back in a rough braid, an apron stained with flour and what looked like beet juice. A kitchen girl. She had a flat of seedlings beside her and a small hand trowel, and she was talking. Not to me, not even to herself. She was talking to the plants. You'll like it here once you settle, she was saying to a basil seedling. The soil's good, a bit stony, but that just means your roots will have something to grip. You'll be fine. And my daughter was sitting beside her. Not hiding. Not tucked under a table or pressed against a wall with her knees drawn up and her eyes closed. Sitting, cross-legged in the dirt, her nightgown smudged with soil, the carved wolf balanced on her knee, watching the kitchen girl's hands as they turned the earth. Leela was calm. I had not seen Leela calm, in the presence of a stranger, in 3 years. I stood in the gateway and did not breathe. I was afraid that if I moved, if I made a single sound, whatever spell was holding my daughter in that rare, fragile stillness would shatter, and she would bolt like a hare, and I would find her under the nursery table again with her face pressed to the wall and her silence like a door that no one could open. The kitchen girl noticed me first. She looked up and her eyes were green, a clear, unsettled green like shallow water over river stones, and they went wide when she saw me. She knew who I was. Everyone in Dunhallow knew who I was. My lord, she said, and started to rise, and her hand went to her apron as though she could brush the dirt away fast enough to be presentable. I'm sorry, I didn't know the garden was. I found the gate unlocked this morning, and the beds needed turning, and I thought. Be still, I said, not a command, a plea, because Leela had not flinched. Leela, who flinched at every raised voice, every sudden movement, every unfamiliar face, had not flinched when this girl spoke. She was still sitting in the dirt, watching the basil seedling, her small fingers touching its leaves. The kitchen girl went still. She looked at Leela, then at me, and something in her face changed. She understood. I did not know how, but she understood. "She came on her own," the girl said quietly. "I was already here when she walked in. I didn't call her. I didn't touch her. She just sat down." I looked at my daughter. Leela did not look back. She was watching a ladybird crawl across the thyme, her brow furrowed in the serious way of a child who has found something more interesting than grief. "What is your name?" I asked the girl. "Briar, my lord. I work in the kitchens. Marta took me on last month." "Who unlocked the gate?" She hesitated. "I did, my lord. I found the key on the hook by the storeroom. The rosemary was dying. I could smell it from the corridor, and it seemed wrong to let it go. I'm sorry. I should have asked." She should have, but the rosemary was not dying anymore. It stood thick and dark along the south wall, freshly watered, its roots mulched with straw. She had saved it. She had saved the thing I could not bring myself to touch, and she had done it without knowing what it meant. "Don't lock the gate again," I said. I left before I had to explain why my voice had roughened. And in the corridor, alone, with the smell of Syrah's rosemary on the cold air, I pressed my hand flat against the stone wall and stood there until the shaking passed. That was the first morning. The second morning, Leela went back. The nurse came to me in the study, flustered, wringing her hands. Leela had risen before dawn, dressed herself, which she had not done in months, and walked to the herb garden. The nurse had followed at a distance and found her sitting in the same spot, beside the kitchen girl, watching her work. On the third morning, I went to watch from the upper corridor, where the arched window overlooked the garden. Briar was weeding the beds, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, and she was talking again. Not to Leela specifically. She never addressed Leela directly, never asked her questions, never put her in the position of being expected to answer. She talked to the garden the way a river talks to the stones it passes over, steadily, without demand. "The lavender's done well for you," she told the bed along the east wall. "Someone planted you with real care. You've got good roots. That's what matters. It's not the flower people see, it's the roots underneath." Leela sat beside her, her carved wolf on her knee, listening. On the fourth morning, Leela brought a cup of water and set it beside Briar's trowel. Briar glanced at it, said thank you, without looking up, without making it a moment, and kept weeding. Leela sat back down. That was the first thing my daughter had given anyone in 3 years. I did not tell the council. I did not tell Brennan or old Marta or the healer who came once a month and left with the same helpless expression each time. I did not tell anyone because if I spoke about it, I would have to name what I was feeling, and I did not trust what I was feeling. It was too close to hope, and hope, in my experience, died in the night while you were sleeping and left you holding its cold weight every morning. But I went to the window every day. On the 7th morning, I saw Briar hand Leela a seedling, a small sprig of mint, its roots dangling in a clump of black earth. She set it in Leela's cupped hands and pointed to a gap in the bed. Leela looked at the gap, looked at the seedling, and then, slowly, carefully, with the serious focus of a child performing a sacred rite, she pressed it into the soil. Briar said nothing. She did not clap or cheer or tell Leela she had done well. She simply handed her another seedling. Leela planted 12 that morning. She came back to the keep with dirt under her fingernails and a smudge of soil on her chin, and when the nurse tried to wash her hands, she pulled away, not with her usual flinch, but with the ordinary stubbornness of a child who is not finished being dirty. Old Marta cornered me in the corridor that evening. Marta had been the cook at Dunhallow since before I was born, and she did not stand on ceremony. "The kitchen girl," she said. "Briar, you know she's been with your daughter." "I know." Every morning, 7 days straight. The girl doesn't force it. She doesn't try to make Leela talk. She just lets her be. I know, Marta. She studied me with the sharp eyes of a woman who had raised 3 children and buried one. When was the last time Leela sat with anyone for 7 minutes, let alone 7 days? I did not answer. I did not need to. Marta patted my arm, the only person in Dunhallow who would dare, and went back to her kitchen. That night I sat in my study with the fire burned to embers and the ledger of the kingdom open before me, unread, and I thought about the way Briar's voice sounded through the garden, low, steady, unhurried. The way she spoke to the plants as though they deserved an explanation for being moved. The way she had said, "Thank you," when Leela brought the water, without weight, without ceremony, as though kindness were an ordinary thing that did not require applause. Something shifted in my chest. Not my wolf, he was still a stone, still a weight at the bottom of a river I had given up trying to cross, but something behind him, something I did not have a name for yet. I closed the ledger and went to bed and did not sleep. On the 9th morning, I went to the garden myself. Briar startled when she saw me. She was dividing a clump of chamomile, and she nearly dropped it, and I felt a flicker of something that might have been guilt for surprising her. "My lord," she said. "I'll go, you want time with your daughter." "Stay." She stared at me. Leela, sitting beside the thyme, did not look up. The carved wolf was balanced on a stone beside her, and she was sorting pebbles into a line, small, medium, large, with the quiet absorption of a child who has found a task worth doing. "I don't want you to go," I said. The words came out rougher than I intended. She hasn't been like this, with anyone, since her mother died. Briar's hands went still in the chamomile. She looked at Leela, and the expression that crossed her face was not pity. It was recognition. The kind of look you give a creature you understand because you have been that creature yourself. "She's not broken," Briar said. "She's just waiting." "For what?" "For someone who doesn't need her to be fixed." I stood in the garden for a long time after that. Briar went back to her chamomile, and Leela went on sorting pebbles, and no one spoke, and the silence between the 3 of us was not the kind of silence I had been living inside for 3 years. It was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of a room where everyone is doing exactly what they ought to be doing, and the quiet is a kindness, not a wound. When I finally left, I stopped in the gateway and looked back. Briar was showing Leela how to deadhead the lavender, pinching off the spent blooms between her thumb and forefinger. Their heads were close together, brown braid and dark hair, and the sun was behind them. And for a moment, just a moment, the light caught them in a way that made them look like a painting of something I had lost and did not dare to want again. My wolf stirred. It was so faint I might have imagined it, a breath, a tremor, a shifting of weight in the dark, like something that had been sleeping for 3 years had turned over and without waking, pressed closer to the warmth. I put my hand against the stone wall and waited for it to come again. It did not. But the stone was warm under my palm, and the rosemary smelled like Sira's hands, and for the first time since the night she died, I did not flinch from it. Lord Aldrich found me in the armory that afternoon, which meant whatever he wanted was too important for a summons and too political for a corridor. "The council has been patient," he said. He was a tall man, silver-haired, meticulous. He had served my father and would serve my son if I ever had one, and his patience, while real, was not infinite. 3 years, Ronan. The kingdom needs an heir. The bloodline needs. I know what the bloodline needs. Then you know I've received word from the Grey Marches. Lady Marin of Highcrest has expressed interest in a formal arrangement. Her wolf line is impeccable. Her father commands the Eastern Garrison. A union would. "Send the invitation," I said, because I was tired and Aldrich was right and the kingdom did need what the kingdom needed, and because I did not yet have the words for what had stirred in the garden that morning. Aldrich looked relieved. She'll arrive within the fortnight. Lady Marin arrived in 12 days. She came with a retinue of 14, 2 wagons of dresses, and a smile that was beautiful and precise and never quite reached her eyes. She was everything the council wanted: highborn, strong-wolfed, politically advantageous, and she moved through Dunhallow as though she were already measuring the windows for new curtains. I did my duty. I walked with her through the halls. I showed her the great room and the council chamber and the east wing, and she asked intelligent questions about the garrison and the trade routes and the state of the border patrols, and I thought, this is fine. This is what it will be: a partnership of purpose, built on duty rather than destiny, and perhaps that is enough. Then Marin met Leela. The nurse brought her to the sitting room on Aldrich's instruction. Leela came in with her carved wolf clutched against her chest, her dark hair uncombed, her eyes on the floor. She looked exactly like what she was, a child who had been woken from the only safe place she knew and brought to perform for a stranger. Marin knelt gracefully with practiced warmth and said, "Hello, sweetheart. I've heard so much about you." Leela backed into the doorframe. Marin tried again. She produced a doll from behind her back, porcelain, beautifully dressed, the kind of gift that must have cost a small fortune, and held it out. "I brought this for you. Her name is Elise. Would you like to hold her?" Leela stared at the doll. Then she turned and walked out of the room, not running, not crying, just leaving with the carved wolf pressed to her ear as though the wooden thing were telling her it was safe to go. Marin rose. Her smile did not waver, but something behind it tightened. "She's shy." "She hasn't spoken in 3 years," I said. The pause. "That must be challenging." "It is." "Children adjust," Marin said. "With patience and the right structure, they always adjust." I looked at her, and for the first time I noticed that her smile, while flawless, was the same smile she wore for the council chamber and the trade routes and the border patrols. It was a smile designed for efficiency. There was nothing wrong with it, but it was not the kind of smile that would sit in the dirt beside a silent child and talk to basil seedlings about the quality of the soil. That evening I went to the garden. Briar was still there, though the light was failing, staking tomato vines by the south wall. Leela was asleep on a folded blanket beside the mint bed, her carved wolf tucked under her chin, and Briar had draped her own shawl over the girl's shoulders. "She fell asleep an hour ago," Briar said without looking up. "I didn't want to move her. She looked peaceful." My daughter looked peaceful, peaceful. I had not seen peaceful in 3 years. "There's a woman here," I said. I did not know why I was telling her. "Lady Marin. The council wants me to. She's here as a potential." "I know, my lord. The kitchen's been cooking for her retinue all week." Of course, the kitchen would know. The kitchen always knew. "Leela wouldn't look at her," I said. Briar tied off a tomato vine, her fingers quick and sure. "Leela doesn't look at anyone." "She looks at you." Briar's hand stopped. She turned her head, and the failing light caught her eyes, that clear riverstone green, and I saw something in them that I recognized because I felt it in myself. Surprise, not at what I had said, but at what it meant. "She looks at the garden," Briar said carefully. "I just happened to be in it." But that was not true, and we both knew it, and the silence that followed was the kind of silence that holds the shape of the thing neither person is willing to say. I carried Leela back to the nursery. She stirred against my shoulder and her fist tightened on the carved wolf, and she smelled like soil and mint and the lavender Briar had planted, and my wolf, that stone, that drowned thing shifted again. Closer this time. Not a breath but a lean, a pressing toward, the way a cold animal presses toward firelight. And beneath the grief and the stone and the 3 years of silence, I heard something I had not heard since Sira died. My own heartbeat. The next day, Marin asked to see the herb garden. One of the kitchen girls had mentioned it, how the Alpha King's daughter spent every morning there, and Marin was strategic enough to follow the trail. I could not refuse without making it obvious, so I walked her through the gate. Briar was there. Leela was beside her, and they were doing something with a length of twine and a row of bean seedlings, and Leela was holding one end of the twine with both hands, pulling it taut while Briar tied the other end to a stake. It was the most purposeful physical task I had seen my daughter perform in 3 years. Marin stopped in the gateway. She took in the scene, the kitchen girl in her flour-stained apron, the Alpha King's daughter sitting in the dirt like a common child, the disorder of the beds with their sprouting green mess, and her smile thinned. "How charming," she said. "You've been letting the kitchen staff mind her." Briar didn't seek her out. Leela comes here on her own. Marin stepped forward and knelt beside Leela, smooth and poised. "Sweetheart, I thought we could take a walk today, just the two of us. I'd love to show you the horses. Do you like horses?" Leela dropped the twine and went still. The carved wolf appeared in her hand. It lived in her pocket now, since she had stopped clutching it to her chest, and she pressed it to her ear. "Come on," Marin said and reached for her hand. Leela flinched, not the small flinch of a startled child, the full-body flinch of a creature that has been reached for too many times by hands that did not understand. She scrambled backward and hit the edge of the raised bed, and her breath came in the high, tight gasps that I knew meant she was about to crawl under the nearest thing and stay there for hours. Briar moved. Not quickly, there was nothing sudden about it. She simply set down her trowel, shifted to where Leela could see her, and held out a sprig of lavender. "Smell this," she said. Her voice was low and level, the same voice she used for the basil seedlings. "It's the one you planted last week. It's doing well." Leela looked at the lavender. Her breathing slowed. She reached out and took the sprig and held it under her nose, and her small shoulders dropped from her ears, and she sat back down beside Briar the way water settles back into the shape it was before the stone hit. Marin stood up. Her smile was gone. "She's quite attached to the kitchen girl," she said. There was nothing warm in her voice. "Her name is Briar," I said. "Right, Briar." Marin brushed the dirt from her skirt. "You know, Ronan, children like this, the silent ones, the ones who fixate, they need structure, not indulgence. Letting her sit in the dirt all day with a servant isn't going to help her speak." Something in my chest went cold. Not my wolf, something older, something that predated the wolf entirely. The cold that comes when someone tells you your child is a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. "Leela is not fixating," I said. "She is choosing." Marin looked at me. She was clever enough to hear what I was not saying and politic enough not to press it. She inclined her head and left the garden, and her retinue followed, and the gate swung shut behind them, and the silence that remained was the garden's own silence, green and growing and unhurt. Briar had not looked up during the exchange. She was retying the twine Leela had dropped, her fingers quick, her head bent. But her jaw was tight, and her hands were not quite steady, and when I said her name she flinched herself, just once, just barely. "Briar." She looked at me. The Riverstone eyes were bright, not with tears, with the particular brightness of a person who has just watched someone call a child difficult and is trying very hard not to say what she thinks. "She's not difficult," Briar said. "She is the bravest child I have ever met. She lost her mother, and she survived it, and if the way she survived it is silence, then silence is what she needed, and it is no one's place to take that from her until she decides to set it down herself." The garden was very still. A bee moved through the lavender. My daughter sat in the dirt, the sprig of lavender in one hand and the carved wolf in the other, and she was looking at Briar with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was trust. I left the garden because if I stayed another moment I would have said something I was not ready to say. But as I walked the east corridor, the cold in my chest did not leave. It changed. It warmed. Slowly, the way frost thaws from a window when you hold your palm against it, not all at once, but in a spreading circle, and inside the circle you can see through the glass again, and what you see is the thing you had forgotten was outside. My wolf rose. Not a stir this time, not a breath or a tremor or a lean. He rose the way a creature rises who has been lying in the dark for 3 years and has finally heard a sound worth standing for. And the sound was not her voice, not yet. The sound was the silence breaking. The noise I had lived inside, the grief, the duty, the council's careful arrangements, the howling absence of the woman I had buried went quiet, all of it, like a wind dying. And in the quiet I could hear things I had stopped hearing a long time ago. My heartbeat, the creak of the keep settling. A blackbird in the courtyard. The distant, faint, impossible sound of my daughter's breathing, steady and calm in a garden full of things that were growing because a girl from the kitchen had not been afraid to kneel in the dirt. My wolf said nothing. He did not need to. He looked in the direction of the garden, and I looked in the direction of the garden, and for the first time in 3 years we were looking at the same thing. I sent Maren home. Aldrich came to me within the hour, gray with displeasure. This is a mistake. Her father commands the Eastern. Find another alliance. There is no other alliance of this caliber, and you know it. What possible reason? She called my daughter difficult. Aldrich paused. He was a careful man, and he had served my father through worse disagreements than this, and he knew when I had made a decision that would not be unmade. She used the word fixating, he said slowly, which is not technically. Aldrich. She reached for Leela's hand, and Leela flinched, and Maren did not understand what the flinch meant. I need a Luna who understands what the flinch means. He studied me for a long moment, and who would that be? I did not answer, because I was not yet certain I had the right to want what I was beginning to want, and I would not say it until I was sure. But Aldrich had served 2 kings, and he knew me well enough to hear the answer in the silence. The kitchen girl, he said. Her name is Briar. She has no family, no pack name, no lineage. Her wolf is. Her wolf is not the point. Then what is? My daughter chose her, that is the point. Aldrich left. He was not convinced, but he was loyal, and loyalty in Dunhallow meant trusting the king even when the king had not yet explained himself. That evening I went to the garden at dusk. Briar was alone, Leela had gone to supper, and she was watering the rosemary by hand, filling the watering can from the stone trough and carrying it to each plant, slow and careful in the failing light. She did not see me at first, and I stood in the gateway and watched her move along the row, and my wolf watched with me, and neither of us breathed. The bond, I could name it now, because I had felt it once before. The night Sira looked at me across a crowded hall, and I knew the bond was not what it had been with Sira. That bond had struck like lightning, instant and blinding and sure. This bond was different. It was like hearing. Like the world going quiet, and in the quiet, one sound emerging steady, warm, certain as a heartbeat. Briar's voice when she talked to the plants. Briar's hands in the soil. Briar holding out lavender to a frightened child and saying, with perfect, unrehearsed steadiness, "Smell this. It's the one you planted." That sound, her. The bond was the sound of her. She saw me and nearly dropped the watering can. "My lord, I'm sorry. I'm always sorry when you find me here, which is probably a sign I should stop being here." "You should not stop being here." She set the can down. She was nervous. She was always nervous around me, and it occurred to me that I had never given her a reason not to be. I was the Alpha King. I gave orders and made decisions and held councils, and moved through Dunhallow like a weather front, and no one in my keep was relaxed around me except old Marta and a 5-year-old girl with a carved wolf. "I sent Lady Maren home," I said. Briar blinked. "Oh." "She was not right for Leela." That's not my place to." "She was not right," I said again, "because Leela did not choose her. Leela chose you." The garden was very quiet. A moth circled the lantern Briar had hung on the gate hook, and the rosemary moved in the evening breeze, and my wolf was standing now, standing inside me the way he had not stood since the night I buried Sira and he lay down, and I thought he would never rise again. "My lord, I'm a kitchen girl," Briar said. "I peel turnips and I weed beds and I talk to plants because they're the only things that don't mind my company. Whatever you think whatever Leela's doing, it isn't. My wolf knows your name." She stopped, her lips parted but no sound came. "He has been silent for 3 years," I said. "Since the night my mate died. He went down and he did not come back. And now he is standing and he knows your name, and I think he knew it before I did, because he heard it the way you hear the first bird song after a long winter, not because it is loud, but because everything else has finally gone quiet enough to let it through." Briar's eyes were bright. The lantern caught the green and turned it gold, and her hands were clenched at her sides, and she was not moving, and I understood that she was afraid. Not of me, of the size of the thing I was naming. "I will not command you," I said. "I will not claim you in front of anyone or put you in a position you have not chosen. If you walk out of this garden and tell me tomorrow that you are only a kitchen girl who talks to plants, I will accept it, and I will never speak of this again. But I am telling you because you deserve to know that my wolf has named you mate. And my daughter, who has not spoken in 3 years, who has not chosen anyone, who has not trusted anyone, chose you first." Briar stood there for a very long time. The moth circled, the rosemary breathed. And then she said, in a voice so quiet I heard it only because my wolf was listening with every part of himself. "I felt it too. I did not move, I did not dare. In the garden," she said, "the first morning when you stood in the gateway and told me to be still, I thought it was fear. You're the Alpha King. Of course I was afraid, but it wasn't fear, it was," she pressed her hand to her sternum. "It's quiet. When you're near, everything goes quiet and I can hear things I couldn't hear before. The garden, my own breathing, Leela's heartbeat, yours." My wolf made a sound inside me that I had never heard him make. Not a howl, not a growl. A sigh. The sigh of a creature that has come home after a journey so long he had forgotten home was a real place. "What do we do?" Briar whispered. "We let Leela decide," I said. "She chose first. She gets to decide how this goes." Briar looked at me, and the fear in her face softened into something I did not have a word for in any language. It was not love yet. It was the thing that comes just before love, the clearing in the forest where the light is right and the ground is solid and you think, yes, I could build something here. I went back to the keep. I did not touch her. I did not need to. The bond was between us now, real and acknowledged, and it hummed like a low note in the bass of a cathedral, felt in the bones, not heard. Leela decided faster than either of us expected. It was a rain-gray morning, 5 days after Marin left. The council had gathered in the great hall for the monthly hearing, disputes, petitions, the ordinary commerce of a kingdom, and Leela was with the nurse in the upper gallery, watching through the balustrade because she liked the patterns the morning light made on the stone floor. She always watched from above. She never came down. Briar was not in the hall. She was in the kitchen, where she belonged, doing what she always did. She had no reason to be in the hall and no invitation, and she would never have come on her own. But old Marta needed someone to carry the cider tray to the council table, and the scullery boy had burned his hand, and so Marta sent Briar. She came through the side door, the tray balanced on her hip, her apron clean for once, her braid tucked up. She moved quickly, eyes down, the way a woman moves when she hopes no one will notice her. She set the tray on the table. She turned to leave. And Leela saw her. I was watching the gallery, the way I always watched the gallery when Leela was there, and I saw my daughter go still. Her hands tightened on the balustrade. She stared at Briar with the fierce, total focus of a child who has just seen the one person in the world she wants. Then she moved. She pulled away from the nurse. She walked, not ran, walked to the gallery stairs. She descended one step at a time, her small hand gripping the railing, the carved wolf in her other fist. The hall was full. 40 wolves, the council, the petitioners, the guards, Aldrich at my right hand. Every one of them turned to watch the Alpha King's silent daughter walk down the stairs. The hall went quiet. Not my wolf's quiet, the hall's quiet. The held breath quiet of a room full of people who know they are watching something that matters. Leela reached the bottom of the stairs. She crossed the floor. She passed the council table, past Aldrich, past the guards, and she walked to Briar, who was standing by the side door with the empty tray and a face full of bewildered terror, and my daughter reached up and took Briar's free hand. And spoke. Her voice was small. It was rusty and thin, the voice of a child who has not used it in 3 years and has to find it again the way you find a path that has grown over with bracken. But it was clear. And every wolf in Dunhallow heard it, because the room was silent and Leela was not. "This is my mommy now." Briar made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something they did not know they were holding breaks open and the light gets in. The tray clattered to the floor. She dropped to her knees and Leela stepped into her arms, and Briar held her the way you hold a thing that is precious beyond any measure you have ever known, and her hand cupped the back of my daughter's dark head, and they stayed there on the cold stone floor while the hall watched and no one moved. My wolf broke open. Not gently, not the way he had risen, slow and careful over the weeks. He broke the way a river breaks through a dam, sudden, total, irreversible, and the sound that came through me was not a howl. It was a note, a single, sustained, golden note like a bell struck in a cathedral, and it filled my chest and my throat and my bones, and it said, with a certainty that left no room for grief or duty or doubt, "Mate, she is mate, she was always mate." I stood up from the council seat. The chair scraped back and every head turned to me, Aldrich's, Brennan's, the petitioners, the guards, and I walked down from the dais. I crossed the hall, past the council table, past the men who wanted me to choose a lineage and a wolf line and a strategic alliance, and I went to Briar. She looked up at me from the floor, her arms still around my daughter, her eyes streaming, and I saw her, not the kitchen girl, not the Omega with no family and no pack name, not the girl who talked to plants because they were the only things that did not mind her company. I saw her the way my wolf saw her, the way Leela saw her, whole. A woman who had walked into a locked garden and opened it. A woman who had sat beside a silent child and not tried to fix her. A woman whose steady, unhurried warmth had done what no healer, no highborn lady, no strategic arrangement could do. She had given my daughter her voice back. I knelt. The Alpha King of Dunhallow knelt on the cold stone floor of his own hall, in front of his council and his guard and his people, and I took Briar's hand, the hand that was not holding my daughter, and I held it the way you hold something you have been searching for without knowing you were searching. "My wolf has named you," I said. "My daughter has chosen you, and I am asking you, not commanding, asking, will you stand beside me?" Briar looked at me. The tears were still on her face, and Leela was still in her arms, and the carved wolf, Sira's carved wolf, the river birch wolf that had been my daughter's only companion for 3 years, was pressed between them, held by a child who had finally found something worth holding besides grief. "Yes," Briar said. The hall did not erupt. There was no great cheer, no stamping of feet. What happened was quieter than that, and I think truer. A silence fell, the good kind, the kind that follows a held breath when the thing you were afraid of does not happen and the thing you hope for does. And then Brennan, my captain, who had carried Leela on his shoulders when she was 2 and made shadow wolves on the nursery wall, stepped forward and bowed, not to me, to Briar, to the woman his king's daughter had chosen. Aldrich was next. He came down from the dais with his silver hair and his careful eyes and his lifetime of service to 2 kings, and he bowed, and if his bow was stiff, it was honest, and honesty was all I had ever asked of him. One by one the hall followed, not because they were commanded, because they had heard a 5-year-old girl speak for the first time in 3 years, and they had seen who she spoke for, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. I did not make a speech. I did not announce her title or decree her rank or perform the formal rites of claiming. Those would come later, the ceremony, the blessing, the Luna's mantle placed on her shoulders before the full moon. But in that moment, on the cold stone floor with my daughter between us and my wolf singing his one golden note, the only thing that mattered was Briar's hand in mine and the word she had said. Yes. Later that evening, when the hall was empty and the fire was low and the keep had settled into its nighttime quiet, I found them in the nursery. Briar was sitting in the rocking chair by the window and Leela was in her lap, and they were doing something neither of them had done before. They were talking. Leela's voice was halting, small, full of stops and starts. A 3-year silence does not end in a single sentence, and the words came back to her the way the seedlings came up in the garden, slowly, unevenly, with gaps that needed patience. But they came. "The lavender," Leela said, "is it going to grow big?" "Very big," Briar said. "By next summer it'll be taller than you." "Taller than me." "Taller than your knees, at least." Leela considered this. "What about the mint?" "The mint will try to take over the world if we let it. That's what mint does. We'll have to keep it in its bed." "How?" "We'll build a little stone wall around it. You can help me carry the stones." "I can carry stones," Leela said. It was not a boast. It was a declaration, the declaration of a child who has discovered that she is capable of things, that her hands can do more than clutch a carved wolf and wait for the grief to end. I stood in the doorway and listened. I did not go in. This was theirs, this quiet, this new language growing between them like the herbs in the garden, green and fragile and alive. But Leela saw me. She turned in Briar's lap and her dark eyes, Sira's eyes, the same deep brown that had looked at me across a crowded hall and changed my life, found me in the doorway. "Daddy," she said. It was the first time she had called me that in 3 years. The word went through me like sunlight through a window, not the stained glass of ceremony and duty, but the plain glass of a nursery, clear and warm and ordinary. And I thought, this is what it sounds like. Not a kingdom, not a lineage, not a strategic alliance. Just a child's voice saying a word she had set down and finally picked back up. I crossed the room. I sat on the floor beside the rocking chair because there was nowhere else to sit and because the floor felt right, low and solid and close. Briar reached down and laid her hand on my shoulder and her touch was light, the way her hands were light in the garden, and my wolf settled into a quiet I had never known him to hold before. Not silence, stillness. The stillness of a creature that has stopped searching because the search is over. Leela leaned over the arm of the chair and placed the carved wolf on my knee. "Mommy made that," she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, the way children are matter-of-fact about the most enormous things. "For me, when I was little." "I know," I said. "I was there." "She said it would keep me safe." "It did." Leela looked at the wolf. Then she looked at Briar. And then she did something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life, longer than any battle, longer than any crown, longer than the memory of a hall full of wolves bowing. She took the carved wolf from my knee and placed it in Briar's hands. Briar looked down at it, her eyes filled. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say, because the gift was not a thing that words could hold. A child who had clutched this wooden wolf for 3 years, who had held it to her ear as though her dead mother's voice were inside it, who had carried it through a silence so deep it had become her whole world, that child had just given it away. Not because she did not need it anymore, but because she had found something that meant what the wolf had always meant. Safety, love, a hand that would not let go. Briar pressed the wolf to her chest and held it the way Leela had held it, close and careful, and her tears fell on the smooth river birch. And my daughter put her hand on Briar's cheek and wiped one of them away with her thumb. Don't be sad, Leela said. You're here now. I put my arm around them both. My daughter and the woman my daughter had chosen before I had the courage to choose her myself. And I held on, and my wolf held on, and the fire crackled low, and the carved wolf rested between us like a small wooden bridge between the life we had lost and the life that was beginning. The ceremony came later. The full moon, the Luna's mantle, the pack assembled in the great hall where Leela had spoken. Briar stood beside me in a gown of deep green, not the white of a first mating, because she had chosen the green herself, saying it reminded her of the garden, and the pack witnessed, and Aldrich placed the mantle on her shoulders with hands that had steadied. But the moment I carry is not the ceremony. The moment I carry is a gray morning, weeks after, when I came down to the garden and found them there, Briar and Leela, side by side in the dirt, planting something new. The lavender was thick along the south wall. The mint was making its bid for world domination inside the stone border Leela had helped build. The rosemary, Sierra's rosemary, stood dark and fragrant and alive, and it did not hurt anymore. It smelled like hands that had loved this place, and hands that loved it now, and the difference between the two was not a wound. It was a widening, a room that had held one kind of love making space for another. Leela was talking. Not fluently, she would never be a child who chattered, but steadily in her careful way, naming the plants as Briar handed them to her. Basil, chamomile, sage. Her voice was still new, still finding its edges, and sometimes she paused, searching for a word, and Briar waited, and the waiting was never impatient, and the word always came. I stood in the gateway and listened, and my wolf listened with me, and we heard three things at once. Briar's voice, steady as a river over stones. Leela's voice, small and brave and growing. And between them, beneath them, holding them both, the hum of the bond, not a crack, not a bell, not a howl, but a warmth, an abiding warmth, like sunlight on an old wall that has stood through every winter and will stand through every winter to come. On the windowsill of the chamber Briar and I now share, the carved wolf sits. River birch, smooth from 3 years of a child's grip, warm from the hands that held it and the hands it was given to. It faces the garden. It watches over the rosemary and the lavender and the mint. It watches over the woman who knelt in the dirt and spoke to the plants as though they deserved an explanation. It watches over the child who crossed a silent hall and found her voice. It watches, and it is not lonely anymore.